I booked the place on a Tuesday in late October, about 3 weeks before my trip. It came up near the top of the search results, a converted carriage house on the edge of a small town called Harlow's Bend, somewhere in the rural mid-Atlantic that I couldn't have found on a map without squinting. The listing photos showed warm Edison bulb lighting, exposed brick, a cast-iron clawfoot tub, and a kitchenette with mismatched ceramic mugs arranged on open shelves. It had 4.5 stars and 62 reviews. Most of them said some version of the same thing. Quiet, charming, perfect for a solo getaway. That was exactly what I needed. I'd spent the better part of that year finishing a graduate thesis on archival research methods, not the most glamorous subject, I know, and by October I was hollowed out in a way that sleep couldn't fix. My apartment in the city felt like a storage unit I happened to breathe in. My friends had stopped inviting me places because I kept canceling. My advisor had started emailing me with that particular brand of academic encouragement that is really just thinly veiled concern. I needed a week somewhere that wasn't here, somewhere I could sit in silence and remember what silence was supposed to feel like. Harlow's Bend was a 3-hour drive northeast. I left on a Friday morning just after 7 with a thermos of coffee and a playlist I never ended up turning on. The interstate gave way to state routes, which gave way to county roads, which finally narrowed into something that the GPS called a road, but that my tires interpreted as a suggestion. The trees on either side had gone full autumn, deep amber and rust and a bruised, almost burgundy red. And by the time I reached the property, the light was that particular late morning gold that makes everything look like it belongs in an oil painting. The carriage house sat at the back of a gravel lot behind a larger, presumably owner-occupied farmhouse. The listing had mentioned that the host, a woman named Dorothea, lived on site, but in the separate main house and would leave me entirely alone unless I needed something. There was a lockbox by the carriage house door. The code she'd sent me worked on the first try. Inside, it smelled like cedar and dried lavender and just the faintest trace of wood smoke, and I stood in the doorway for a full minute before stepping in, just taking it in. The brick was original. The floors were wide pine boards that creaked pleasantly underfoot. A small wood stove sat in the corner with a stack of split logs beside it. The bed was pushed against the far wall under a low window, and the duvet was the kind of heavy, cream-colored linen that makes you think about sleeping the moment you see it. I unpacked slowly. I didn't have much: a duffel bag, my laptop, 3 books I'd been meaning to read since spring. I made a cup of tea in the little kettle on the kitchenette counter and sat at the small table by the window and watched the field behind the property for a long time. There were no other houses visible from that angle, just the field, some fence posts, and the tree line beyond. A crow sat on one of the posts for a while, then left. The afternoon came on quietly, the gold fading to silver, and I felt genuinely, for the first time in months, like I could breathe. I went to bed early that first night. I didn't even read. I just turned off the lamp on the nightstand and lay in the dark and listened to the place settle around me, the small ticks and groans of old wood adjusting to the night temperature, and I was asleep within minutes. The first thing I noticed, and this was the morning of the second day, was the mug. I want to be precise about this because it matters. When I arrived, I had taken one of the mugs from the open shelf, a blue one with a small chip on the handle, and I'd made my tea and then washed the mug and returned it to the shelf. I remember doing this. I remember placing it on the left side of the shelf, handle facing out, because there was already a white mug in the center and I'd moved it slightly to make room. When I came down Saturday morning, still slow and soft from sleeping 9 hours, the blue mug was on the right side of the shelf. The white mug was back in the center. I stood there for a moment, holding the kettle. Then I told myself, I don't actually remember where I put it. I was tired. I put it on the right. That's all. I made my coffee. I sat by the window. The crow was back on the fence post, or a different crow, and I watched it for a while and thought about nothing in particular and decided the mug was not a thing worth thinking about. The second incident was harder to rationalize. Saturday evening, I'd gone through the side door of the carriage house There was a small covered porch on the south side, just big enough for 2 chairs and a railing, to sit outside for a while before dinner. It was cold, properly cold, and I'd only stayed about 20 minutes before going back in. I locked the side door behind me. I know I did, because I remember the specific way the latch stiffened and I had to press my palm flat against the door to get it to catch. I checked it twice. Then I went to the kitchenette and made pasta and ate at the table and read for a while and went to sleep. Sunday morning, the side door was unlocked. Not open, just unlocked. I checked the front door, the main entry, still locked. The windows were all latched, just the side door, standing closed but unlocked, the latch in the open position. I stood with my hand on the handle for what felt like a very long time. Then I locked it again. Then I checked every window in the place, one by one, running my fingers along the latches. All locked. I went back to the side door and stood there and listened. Outside, a light wind moved through the field grass, and the trees at the property edge made a low, ocean-like sound. Nothing else. No footsteps on gravel, no voices from the main house, just wind. I told myself, old locks slip. You thought you checked it, but you didn't. It's an old building. Both of those things were true. Neither of them fully landed. I spent Sunday feeling slightly untethered. I couldn't settle into my book. I kept finding myself facing a wall or a window and realizing I'd lost several minutes just standing there, not thinking anything I could identify, just existing in a kind of low-grade alertness that I couldn't name yet. I ate dinner. I watched something on my laptop. I locked both doors and checked them both 3 times each and went to sleep with my phone charging on the nightstand, screen face up. I woke at 2:17 in the morning. There was no dramatic sound, no crash, nothing that should have pulled me out of sleep that cleanly. I went from unconscious to completely awake in an instant, lying on my back in the dark, staring at the low ceiling. The room was very cold. I hadn't let the wood stove die completely before bed, but the heat had gone. The darkness was thick and total. Cloud cover had moved in during the evening, and the window above the bed showed nothing but a deep, featureless gray. And then I heard it. A footstep. One. A single, slow, deliberate creak from somewhere toward the front of the room, near the door to the kitchenette. The particular sound of a pine board bearing weight and releasing it. Specific, purposeful, real. Not the building settling, not thermal expansion. A footstep. I didn't move. I don't know how long I lay there. My breathing had gone so shallow I wasn't sure I was breathing at all. I was listening with my whole body, every surface of me trying to pick up information from the air, from the floor, from the quality of the silence that followed that single sound. The darkness didn't shift. Nothing moved. There was no second footstep, no breathing than was mine. Just that one sound, and then nothing, and then the deepest quiet I have ever experienced. Eventually, I reached for my phone. The screen light felt like something violent. I turned on the flashlight with shaking hands and swept it across the room. Empty. The kitchenette was empty. The door to the side porch was closed. The front door was closed. Nothing on the floor, nothing displaced, nothing that hadn't been there when I fell asleep. I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, in daylight, I went over every inch of the carriage house. I checked inside the small closet near the bathroom. I checked behind the wood stove. I went into the bathroom and pulled back the shower curtain. I felt ridiculous, and I kept doing it anyway. Nothing. I went outside and walked slowly around the perimeter of the building, looking at the ground. The gravel on the south side near the porch door was disturbed, but gravel is always disturbed. Gravel proves nothing. I nearly messaged Dorothea. I opened the app 3 times and typed fragments of things and deleted them. What would I say? I heard a sound at night? She'd refund me out of pity, and I'd feel humiliated, and nothing would be resolved. I closed the app. That afternoon, Monday, I decided to take a long drive just to be out of the space. I was gone for about 4 hours. I drove through the town center of Harlow's Bend, a pharmacy, a diner, a hardware store, a church, and I got coffee and a sandwich and sat at the counter of the diner and let myself be around other people and felt better for it. When I returned to the carriage house, something was different. The 3 books I'd stacked on the table beside the bed, I'd stacked them in a specific order, largest on the bottom, smallest on top, because that's just what you do, had been moved. They were still on the table, but now they were fanned out slightly, spread open at the covers, like someone had been looking at them, or wanted me to know they'd been looking at them. I stood in the doorway for a long time. My duffel bag was where I'd left it. My laptop was where I'd left it. My toiletries in the bathroom hadn't moved, just the books fanned out on the table in a way that no settling of the building, no vibration, no act of physics I could construct could explain. I packed in 11 minutes. I know this because I looked at my phone when I started and looked at it again when I zipped the bag. I left the remaining logs stacked beside the wood stove. I left the blue mug on the shelf, handle facing right. I locked the front door with the lockbox code and walked to my car and drove away, and did not look in the rearview mirror until I was back on the county road. I messaged Dorothea from a gas station 30 miles away. I told her a family situation had come up and I needed to leave early. She sent back a sad face emoji and told me she'd issue a partial refund. She did. That was the end of it. I never reported anything. I had nothing to report. Moved books, an unlocked door, a sound in the night, a crow on a fence post. None of that is a police matter, but I've thought about it often in the months since then. Specifically, I've thought about this. The lockbox was outside, the code was sent to me through the app, and Dorothea was in the main house. So who had a key? The listing is still up. It still has 4.5 stars. Last month, someone left a review that said, "Cozy and quiet. Felt like I had the whole place to myself." Every light was already on. The plan was simple, the kind that sounds effortless until you're in the middle of executing it. My sister, Renata, and I were driving cross-country, a thing we'd been promising each other for 6 years and finally doing, and we needed a place to stop for 2 nights in the middle of the route, somewhere between the flatlands and the mountain stretch, a place to rest and reset before the harder driving began. We found a rental listed as a private farmhouse suite in a rural stretch of a state I'd only ever passed through. It had a separate entrance, the listing said, full kitchen access, a porch with a fire pit, sleeps 4. The host's name on the listing was listed simply as R. Calloway, and the profile photo was a landscape shot rather than a person, a wheat field at sunset, golden and wide. We arrived on a Wednesday evening, later than we'd planned. The drive had taken longer than expected. A detour around road construction had added nearly 2 hours, and by the time we turned off the main highway onto the access road, the sun had already gone completely, and the darkness out there was the particular kind you only get far from city light. Not just an absence of brightness, but something with texture to it, something that pushes back. The farmhouse appeared in the headlights at the end of a long gravel lane. It was larger than the photos suggested, 2 stories, white-painted wood siding that had gone silver at the edges with age, a wide, covered porch wrapping around the front and the side. The listing had explained that the suite we'd rented was the ground floor back half of the house, accessible through a door off the porch, and that R. Calloway occupied the upper floor, but would be away during our stay, visiting family, and that we'd have the property entirely to ourselves. Every light in the house was on. Not just the suite, every room, every floor. The upstairs windows blazed with warm yellow light. The kitchen light, visible through a window on the side, was on. The porch light, the small lamp visible through the curtain of one of the suite windows, everything. The entire farmhouse was lit up against the dark field behind it like a lantern.
Renata noticed it the same moment I did. We sat in the car for a second, the engine still running, gravel crunching faintly under the tires as I rolled to a stop. "Did he leave the lights on for us?" she said. "Maybe," I said. We sat there a moment longer, then I turned off the engine. The lockbox code worked. The suite was clean, well-furnished, smelling faintly of an orange and clove cleaning product that I associate with places trying to smell comforting. There was a sectional sofa, a low coffee table with a candle on it, a small dining table near the kitchen pass-through, and 2 bedrooms off a short hallway. The beds were made with fresh linens, folded with that particular crispness that means someone made an effort. A small handwritten card on the kitchen counter said, "Welcome. Coffee pods in the second drawer. Firewood on the south porch. Help yourself to anything in the fridge." No signature. Renata walked through the rooms while I stood in the kitchen. I could hear her opening doors, the soft sounds of her checking the closets, the bathroom. I didn't say anything about it. We'd been on the road for 9 hours, and we were both tired and slightly strange in the way that long driving makes you. "All clear," she said, appearing in the kitchen doorway. "Did you check the lights upstairs?" I said. She had not. We stood in the hallway together and looked at the staircase. It was blocked off in the sense that a simple rope barrier had been strung across the bottom, the kind you see in historic houses, a polished brass hook on either side, a velvet rope between them, just a gesture that said, "This half is not yours." The lights up there were still on. We could see the glow at the top of the staircase, a warm ambient brightness bleeding down onto the staircase landing. I texted R. Calloway through the app. "Hey, just arrived. Everything looks great. Did you want us to turn off the lights upstairs or leave them?" No response that night. We ate the food we'd packed, had a glass of wine each, and went to bed. I lay in the bedroom closest to the hallway, which meant I was also closest to the staircase. The light from the top of the stairs was not visible from inside my room with the door closed, but it cast a thin line under the door. Barely anything, a thread of gold, and I was aware of it in the way you're aware of something you've told yourself not to think about. I fell asleep sometime after midnight. I woke up I checked my phone, 3:44 in the morning. The line of light under my door was gone. The upstairs lights were off. I told myself R. Calloway had remote controlled them, or they were on a timer. I told myself this for about 30 seconds. Then I lay very still and listened. The farmhouse was quiet, not the active, breathing quiet of a building at night, but a suspended quiet, a held breath quiet, the quiet of something paused rather than at rest. I had the distinct sensation of sharing the silence with it rather than simply existing inside it, as if the silence were a presence rather than an absence. Then, a sound from the kitchen. Not a creak, not a structural noise. The soft, unmistakable sound of a drawer opening. One specific, deliberate motion. A drawer sliding out on its runners, and then, slowly, sliding back in. I did not move. I lay with my hands flat on the sheets and my eyes on the ceiling, and I counted. I counted slowly to 60, and nothing else happened. No footsteps, no voices, no second sound, just that one action, a drawer opening and closing, and then the held breath quiet again. At 60, I got up. I moved to the door and pressed my ear against it and stood there for another full minute. Nothing. I opened the door slowly, in the way you do when you're trying not to make any noise, though what you're really trying to do is hear anything before it hears you. The hallway was dark. The kitchen was dark. The suite was exactly as we'd left it. The wine glasses on the counter, Renata's sneakers by the front door, the candle we hadn't lit still in its place on the coffee table. The velvet rope across the staircase was still in place. I went to the kitchen and opened the second drawer, the one with the coffee pods. Everything in it was exactly as it had been, but the drawer itself, I pulled it out and pushed it back in, moved on its runners with a soft, specific sliding sound. The same sound, the exact same sound. I stood there with both hands on the counter for a long time. I didn't wake Renata. There was nothing to show her. A drawer that makes a sound when you open it. That's not a thing you wake your sleeping sister for. I went back to bed and lay awake until 6 a.m., and when the light came through the curtains, I felt the tightness in my chest release incrementally, the way it does when darkness loses its hold. In the morning, I mentioned none of this to Renata and felt strange about the omission all through breakfast. She was cheerful, rested, full of energy about the second half of the drive, and I watched her and thought about how differently the same night can inhabit two people in the same building. R. Calloway had replied to my message overnight. Sorry for late reply. The lights are on a schedule. Should turn off at 2 a.m. Let me know if you need anything. The timestamp was 2:07 a.m. I read this 3 times. The lights had gone off at 3:44, not 2. The reply was sent at 2:07, which meant R. Calloway was awake and on his phone, and the lights had stayed on for nearly 2 hours past the point they were supposed to go out, and then they had gone out, and then someone had opened and closed a drawer in the kitchen. I did not reply to the message. We had agreed to stay 2 nights. We stayed 1. I told Renata I wanted to make better time on the second day, and she believed me or chose to, and we were packed and in the car by 9. As we drove away down the gravel lane, I looked in the passenger side mirror. The farmhouse sat in the gray morning light, quiet, lights off, porch empty. On the second floor, a curtain moved. Not the wind. The windows were closed. I didn't say anything. I watched the house shrink in the mirror until the lane curved and the trees swallowed it, and there was nothing left to see. Renata put on a playlist and sang along softly, and I gripped the steering wheel with both hands and drove. We finished the trip. We reached the coast. We stood on the beach at the end of it and took photos and laughed about the things that went wrong, the detours and the flat tire outside of one town, and the diner with the inexplicably bad coffee. I never mentioned the farmhouse. But sometimes, months later, lying in my own apartment, in my own bed, I'll think about that curtain, about how it takes weight to move a curtain like that. Not air, weight. And I think about R. Calloway's listing, which says the host lives upstairs, and I think about how the listing also says the host is always away during guest stays. And I wonder if those two things were ever both true at the same time.
I want to preface this by saying that I am not the kind of person who tells stories like this. I'm an accountant. I spent 15 years in a firm that specialized in municipal tax compliance. I believe in documentation, in receipts, in provable, traceable facts. I say this not to establish credibility. You can make of this what you want, but to explain why the experience I'm about to describe affected me the way it did. Because it's not in my nature to be rattled by things I can't quantify. I was rattled. Last November, I rented a small winter cabin in a wooded area, roughly 4 hours from where I lived. I'd been through a difficult year. A divorce finalized in September, the sale of a house I'd lived in for 11 years, and all the quiet erosions that come with rebuilding a life in your mid-40s. A friend suggested a solo trip somewhere remote. I found the cabin through a rental platform, a place called Aldercroft Cabin, in a listing without a precise town name, just a region, Eastern Hill Country, private access road. The photos showed a small A-frame, very simple, very clean. Stone fireplace, 1 bedroom, a writing desk by the window, porch overlooking a tree-covered hillside. The host, whose profile name was listed as M. Voss, had a 5-star rating and 14 reviews, all of them brief and positive. The most recent one, from a man named David P., said, "Peaceful and isolated, exactly what I needed." I arrived on a Friday afternoon in early November. The access road was unpaved, about 1.5 miles of it, and I drove slowly, the dead leaves thick enough in places that I couldn't fully see the road surface. The A-frame appeared suddenly around a bend, small, dark wooded, sitting in a natural clearing with the hill rising sharply behind it and the trees pressing in close on either side. There were no other structures visible, no other cars, no signs of recent human activity except a neat stack of firewood on the porch and a fresh doormat that still had that slightly chemical smell of new rubber. The key was under the doormat. This had been stated in the check-in instructions, and it struck me even then as an unusual arrangement, not a lockbox with a code, just a key under a mat. But I was tired, and I put the thought aside. Inside, clean, as advertised. Simple wooden furniture, the stone fireplace, a small kitchen with good knives and heavy pots, and the writing desk under the window, which looked out onto the hillside and the trees. On the desk was a small basket containing a local hiking map, a pen, and a guest book. A black hardcover journal with a simple label on the front, Aldercroft Guests. I set my bags down and made myself tea and sat at the desk, and because I couldn't think of a reason not to, opened the guest book. There were perhaps 20 entries, spanning what appeared to be 2 years. People had written about their stays in the short, careful language of guest books, appreciating the quiet, praising the fireplace, noting the deer they'd seen on the hillside. Some had drawn small sketches. The entries were dated, most of them, and I read through them in order, following the cabin's quiet life through other people's brief occupancies. The last entry was undated. The handwriting was different from every previous entry, larger, more pressured, the kind of writing that happens quickly or urgently. It said, "If you're reading this, check the lock on the bedroom window. It doesn't latch properly. You should know." There was no name, no date. I closed the book slowly and sat with it for a moment. Then I went to the bedroom. The window above the bed had a standard double-hung latch, the kind where you twist a small lever to lock the two panels together. I tried it. It moved loosely in its housing, the way these latches do when the screws have backed out over years of use, when the wood is swollen and contracted through too many seasons. When I pressed the lever down firmly and let go, it stayed, but it required that pressure. Left to itself, it didn't fully engage. The window could be lifted from the outside with the right angle and modest force. I went back to the living room and sat in the chair by the fireplace for a long time. The rational interpretation, a previous guest had discovered this and left a note as a courtesy, a perfectly reasonable thing to do, a thoughtful thing even. And yet, the note was undated. It was written in a hand that seemed hurried, almost distressed. It was the last thing in the book, and the lock was real, not imagined, not overstated in the note. It genuinely didn't latch. I propped a chair under the bedroom agor that night. I know how that sounds. I did it anyway. The first 2 days passed quietly enough. I hiked in the mornings, came back and made large lunches, read in the afternoons, kept the fire going in the evenings. The hillside was beautiful in that particular November way. Everything stripped down to its skeleton. Gray branches against gray sky, the occasional amber leaf still clinging somewhere, the ground covered in the dense, soft carpet of what had fallen. I saw 2 deer on Saturday morning, standing at the tree line, watching me with the unhurried confidence of animals that had determined I was not a threat. On Sunday morning, I noticed the firewood. When I'd arrived Friday, there was a stack on the porch. I'd been pulling from it each evening, 3 or 4 logs at a time for the fireplace. By Sunday morning, I'd used perhaps a third of the stack. But when I went out to get logs before breakfast, the stack was fuller than it had been the night before. Not dramatically, not so that I could have been certain I'd miscounted, but fuller. The level of the stack was higher than I remembered, 2 or 3 logs worth. I stood on the porch in the cold morning air and stared at the stack for a long time. My breath made small clouds. The trees were perfectly still. The hillside was empty. I went inside and ate breakfast and told myself, "You miscounted. You took fewer logs than you thought. The stack looked fuller in the morning light." I spent Sunday feeling watched. It wasn't a single incident or a specific noise. It was cumulative. The feeling of eyes, of a presence adjusting to mine, staying precisely at the edge of my perception. When I hiked that afternoon, I stayed on the trail and didn't go as far as I had the day before, and turned back earlier than I'd planned. Walking among those stripped November trees, I had the persistent, involuntary sense that something behind me was adjusting its pace to mine. Not footsteps, not sounds, just a sense. The kind your body produces when something ancient in it is paying attention. Sunday night, I didn't sleep well. I lay in bed with the chair still wedged under the door and listened to the cabin, the window above me with its soft latching lock, the trees outside moving slightly in a wind I couldn't see, the fire in the other room going to embers. At some point, very late, I heard breathing. Not inside, outside, just beyond the bedroom window, at the exact height and angle of a person standing at the side of the cabin. Slow, steady breathing in the cold air, the almost inaudible sound of it, the rhythmic misting that cold breath makes. I lay completely still and listened for a very long time. And then I heard footsteps, not on the porch, but in the dead leaves alongside the cabin, moving slowly toward the back of the building, and then around the corner and away into the trees. Unhurried, each footstep deliberate, leaves pressed down, one at a time, growing quieter and quieter, until there was nothing but the wind and the last heat of the fireplace and my own pulse in my ears. I did not open the window. I did not go to the front door. I lay in that bed with my hand on my phone until the first gray light came through the curtains, and then I got up and dressed and packed methodically and efficiently, the same way I approach a tax return, one thing at a time, no rushing, each step complete before the next begins. Before I left, I opened the guest book to the last page. I read the undated entry one more time. If you're reading this, check the lock on the bedroom window. Then I found a pen and wrote beneath it, in my own accountant's hand, precise and level. I read it. I checked it. Something was outside on the night of November 10th, moving in the leaves beside the cabin, past the bedroom window. The firewood was restocked sometime Saturday night. The key is under the mat. You should know. I left the date. I left it unsigned. I drove the 1.5 miles of unpaved road with both hands on the wheel and did not look at the trees on either side. When I reached the main road, I sat there for a moment with the engine idling and the heater running and the turn signal clicking in the morning quiet. M. Voss replied to my post-stay message with the standard thank you and a request for a review. I left 4 stars. In the public comment, I wrote only, quiet and remote, exactly as described. I never mentioned the guest book. I never mentioned the footsteps. I never mentioned the firewood, or the window, or the breathing in the cold November air. I think about the next person who stays there, though. I think about them often, especially on winter nights when the wind is up and the building makes sounds. I think about them opening that guest book, reading through the brief and careful entries, arriving at mine, and I hope, whoever they are, that they check the window.